Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's Scott Groves here with my new friend, Dr. B. I'm not going to be smoking a cigar here because this poor guy has to sit in a car for the next 12 hours driving back from Denver to Las Vegas. Dr. B is an author and a coach. He wrote this book here, which we'll put in the show notes. There is no tiger. And I'd be lying if I read the whole thing, but I was able to get to a couple chapters before you showed up. So Tell us a little bit about you. Give us the 60-second Reader's Digest, other than the fact that we got your lovely wife here with us. What's your story in a nutshell?
Oh, that's cool. I mean, when I think about my life, right, I'm almost 60 years old, so 59, and just enjoying life more today than I ever have. We have 8 children. We have 8 children, 16 grandkids. And
holy cow.
So we were just visiting a couple in Southern California there. So we got to do the Halloween thing, and which is super cool, just to be able to hang out with your grandkids and spend time. And one comes over every day. You know, I do, all the things that I try to keep involved. Right now, I'm super excited about a thing called Journey to Freedom, which is I'm interviewing this year 100 black men about not being stuck and being able to move forward and be able to achieve their dreams. So with the coaching stuff that I'm doing, not only by coaching people and businesses and stuff, but I've been coaching track now for 38 years. And so
were you a track star?
I was a track athlete, so I was back in the day. I had the opportunity to run against a gentleman named Edwin Moses, which he won like 142 straight races from like 1972 to 1984. And then a guy named Kevin Young who took the world record from him. And so in the 400 hurdles. So that
was your event?
That was my event, the 400 hurdles. And there was times that I tried the 110 hurdles and thought I wanted to be a 110 hurdle, until there was one time I was in Helsinki and we're at the Olympic Stadium there, and I just know I'm going to win. I mean, this is going to be, I'm excited. I'm getting in the blocks. I'm going. There's this Canadian guy that we're just kind of going back and forth and looking at each other. And then the blocks go off and I get to that first hurdle and I look up and Mr. Mark McCoy is in hurdle 3. And I'm like, oh no, I'm not going to win this race. And so I ran one of the best races of my life. Now, of course, he won the Olympic gold in 1988. So I didn't feel so bad after that, but I was so way outclassed.
It's like when my Steelers lose, I got to root for that other team to win the Super Bowl so I can be, at least they lost to the Super Bowl champs, right?
Exactly. So
how messed up are your knees and your hips from running hurdles?
Oh my gosh, so
years?
I got knee surgery on one already.
I saw the scar.
The other one, Achilles broke, the back broke. I mean, I was playing basketball. I don't know if you ever heard of a man named Ed Milet. He wrote a book called The Power One. So I'm in his backyard. We're doing it in the sports court. Because I worked with him for about 5 or 6 years. And so we're playing literally and so I'm thinking somebody hit me. And no, there's nobody around me. And it goes, so I get to the hospital. We got good news. We're going to do surgery in the morning, but we're going to take care of you. So the good news is we're going to take care of you. The bad news is you're having surgery in the morning. My Achilles had just rolled all the way up. I didn't really know that it was, because I had never had an Achilles thing. They say that's what men at 30, at that age have basketball injuries. But I knew it when I put the clutch in on my car, because it was my left. Oh my God, I thought I was coming through the roof. So I got somebody to take me to the hospital, and, I've had a back surgery, but life is good. I'm able to walk 3 miles a day right now, do a little bit of jogging, get in a little bit better shape, and just think about what's next in life, what else gets to come.
So I've been a very average athlete my whole life. I was an okay wrestler, okay boxer, okay at jiu-jitsu. What is it like for an aging man when you were elite athlete, like competing against people that won the Olympics, and obviously you didn't do too bad yourself? What is that like, coming to terms with the fact that age is undefeated, the body starts to break down?
Oh my gosh, it's like I try, especially with my grandkids. I'm on the playground just trying to do like a pull up and do something like, oh, this isn't gonna work. Or I'm jogging and I feel like I used to do this every day. I could go 7-8 miles, no problem. Now I'm walking 3 going, ooh, this is good, but it feels good to still know that your body works. I realize it when I'm let's say I'm moving furniture or something with the kids or something like that, and I can still pick up stuff, and and those other people are still struggling. So at least over my lifetime, my athleticism is still, I'm not coordinated anymore, and I probably, I can still throw a ball and that kind of stuff. Everything hurts. At the end of the day, you wake up, but at the same time, you kind of feel like, oh yeah, once upon a day. But then you go out, I coach track, and then 5 years ago, I could demonstrate. This now I'm not demonstrating no more. I'm like, hey, come over here and show you how to go over this hurdle. Because I think the last time I tried to demonstrate, I fell over a hurdle. I'm like, okay, we're done.
That ship has sailed.
That ship is way gone.
So one of the things I liked about your book is that it's very tactical and it's like blocking and tackling. It's not esoteric. It's not woo-woo. It's like, no. If you have analysis paralysis, here's the 10 steps to get out of analysis paralysis. Correlating that to coaching track, in my mind, like if you're coaching running, it's like, all right, guys, go run some more. Mm-hmm. So how does that experience of being a track coach relate to like what's here in the book, There Is No Tiger?
Well, here's what I would say, that most of all coaching, I would say 90% of all coaching is not the actual athletic thing that you do. It's what goes on mentally. It's what goes on when you're thinking, can I do this? Can I improve? Especially when you get to the elite levels, right? If I'm coaching an Olympic athlete right now, I'm not teaching them how to do the event anymore. We're talking about what do we need to do in order to get ready for the next race, but then looking forward and how we're going to get ready for the race in 10 months or how we're going to get ready for the Olympics in 2 years. So it's a progression where you really start thinking about, okay, what is that day-to-day mental thing that you have to do in order to get up every single morning? It's like anything else. We don't feel like getting up in the morning and going to work out. And your Olympic athletes don't feel like getting up in the morning. You know, I'm writing another book. I just finished another book. It's called The Decision Formula. And in the Decision Formula, it's 5 easy steps to making the decisions that'll change your life. And one of the things is just talking about that journey and the journey that you're going to do. And then the cost. You know, what is it going to cost you every single day to get up? And I tell people, if you're going to be this Olympic athlete and you want to show up at the gym once a week, you're not going to be an Olympic athlete. You have to actually decide that you're going to get up every single day and do the thing that you need to do in order to become the person. And I think that's why a lot of people fail just in life and fail in the things they do, is they haven't become that person, but they want to be that person. And in this world that we have now, the journey is it takes time, and we want everything so much instantly. We want that thing to happen right away, and it doesn't. Mm-hmm. It doesn't happen the second that we decide we're going to make that decision. We have to go through this formula, this journey of saying, okay, I am not the person that I need to be, and I'm going to have to become that person, and becoming that person isn't going to be easy all the time. There's going to be some steps that I'm going to have to, you do jiu-jitsu, right? And so if somebody who shows up a beginner and has never done it,
they're totally lost.
They're totally lost. They can't do anything. And you're not going to learn jiu-jitsu and be good enough to go in a ring or an octagon or anything like that in a month, not in 2 months, not in 3 months, right? Because there's so many foundational little things that you need to do. And you think about that in business, or you think about that in my job, or you think about those things that I do. It's not going to happen right away.
You know, I've wanted to write this book for a while. I've got like a few chapters mapped out called The Amazon Generation, where there's pretty much nothing that I can put into my mind that I can't have delivered to my front door within 48 hours, right? Yeah. And so I work in mortgages, and mortgage is very linear. It's like this step begets this step begets this step. You can't go to the end before you get the appraisal or whatever. And the frustration of younger clients I have where they can't just like, well, why can't I have it now? Why can't I just click a button and get a mortgage like Rocket Mortgage has been advertising for years, which has been a huge disservice to the industry? Because I think like generationally, I was right at the cusp. I'm 45, so I was born in 79, right at the cusp where I didn't have a cell phone until I got into the Army. I didn't grow up with computers. So I don't quite have this deep bedded psychological, like I want it now. And so what do you coach? College, high school?
Yeah, right now I'm high school. So
okay.
I did the college for 15 years, and now I'm at the high school level. And right now, I'm even officiating now. So I'm starting again on your marks, get set, go. So I'm doing a lot of stuff that's working on the coaching side of it. And then it's just people, it's just, okay, my goal is to help people become the person they need to be in order to do whatever it is that they want to do.
So when you're thinking of 14, 15-year-olds that were born in 2010, all they know is immediate gratification, touch the phone, flip to the next video on TikTok. How are you taking them a step back to break down like, hey guys, this is a process. We got to walk before we run. We got to run before we hurdle. We got to hurdle before we win a championship. Like, what does that even look like? Because I can tell you with my kids, we try to keep them away from electronics. And the only time I hate my children is when I take away an iPad, because they're like, addicted to the immediacy of it. And so how are you doing that with, young men and young women?
One of the things that I'm finding is I have more issues with their parents than I have with them. Because they understand that there is this journey, there's this process. So like I have an athlete that I know, I'm coaching him in high jump. We get over 7 feet in high jump, which is huge for a high school athlete, right? He's gonna go to college. I think he's potentially an Olympic athlete. Wow. But mom and dad want him to be a basketball player. So at best, he's an average basketball player. He's 6'5", so he's pretty tall, but he can't dribble, so he's not going to be a guard. He's playing center on the high school team, right, which is okay. But at the college level, 6'5" isn't going to get you to be center.
You can barely be a shooting guard in the NBA if you're 6'5" now.
Exactly. So he's wanting to go to college. I'm like, if I can get you to a Division I college for track, you can be on an Olympic team. That's how good I know you are right now because I've done it. I've seen it. I know exactly what talent you have. Mom and dad, well, he's ranked. I'm like, who's ranking him? What do you mean he's ranked? Well, he's ranked in basketball. He's in the state, Colorado, right? We're not a big basketball state, right? So he's ranked in Colorado in the top 15. I'm like, what does that mean? Who is the ranking body that ranks high school kids that says,
right?
Or, even at this point before he's been ranked since he's been in elementary school. Okay. What is it? So
that's because he was 6'2" in fourth grade.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course you're going to be good at basketball.
And so just convincing, this is going to take a process. No, he's not. He's not going to the Olympics, this year. But if he gets into the right school, he's getting to the right place, he's going to be fine. And he ends up going to a junior college to play basketball that doesn't even have a track team.
Hey there, Scott Groves with a quick interruption to the podcast. Sorry about that, but I just want to take a quick minute to announce our sponsors here for the podcast, and that sponsor is me, Scott Groves. It's actually the revenue that we generate through doing mortgages here at Neo Home Loans and the money that we generate from the coaching program that I run, Consolidated Coaching for Loan Officers, coaching by loan officers for loan officers that helps support this podcast. I really started this in 2021 as a passion project during COVID, and we're excited to bring you a new episode every week, but this only happens if I'm making money in my real full-time job. So please, if you or somebody you know is looking to buy, sell, or refinance a house, our team is licensed in almost every state in the country. And if you know a loan officer who's looking for sales coaching, personal development coaching, lead generation coaching, please get in touch with us, Scott at the Scott Groves team. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love for you to support our other endeavors, which is mortgage financing and loan officer coaching, which allows this podcast to exist. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming.
4 years later, he's working at, Walmart or somewhere like that, that's not achieving his dreams, not thinking of all the things he could do, all the things that we built, because it's all mental, right? So it's all those conversations that you have, somebody who wants this immediacy. Well, they want to live, everybody wants to be famous, right? Everybody wants to, it is just amazing. Let's just get to, this is what it took for this person to get famous. And you're not Taylor Swift and you're not Justin Bieber. You're not going to just do a YouTube video and all of a sudden you're going to billions and billions of people are going to do that. But there is an opportunity for you to go through a process. And so the books that you read, the people you hang out with, that has got to be the continuing. We talk about that all the time from the day, probably you and I, that we didn't have cell phones. And what is it you're reading? And who is it that you're spending time with? But at the same time, you're going, okay, so now here's where you're at. Who got to where you want to be? And did it over time. Yeah, that's who you need to start following. That's who you need to start looking at. Until you have 1,000 videos, you're probably not the person who is going to be this famous person on YouTube.
Right.
But what do those 1,000 videos look like? Well, that is you becoming the person. So video 1's going to suck. Video 100's probably going to still suck, right? But after time, you're at 1,000. You're probably getting pretty good. You're probably getting pretty good at listening to somebody, hearing somebody. Whatever it is that you truly want to do. And you'll also find out that this isn't for you. After you've done a couple hundred, now you're going, wait a minute, do I really like this? Do I enjoy this journey? When I think of decisions, I want people to make decisions because 90% or 95%, I'm making this percentage up because I don't know the exact percentage, but I know it's more than 90% of decisions that you make are reversible. There's only a few that are truly irreversible. Like you're going to get your leg amputated. that is irreversible. Your leg is not going to grow back. But if you're going to make a decision for a career, you're going to make a decision to do something incredible with your life, and you find out you're not good at it, that's irreversible. You're going to move to another state. Let's say if I want to move to Vegas here, because I think that's where my opportunity is. I can always go back to Colorado.
Right.
But so I don't have to be 51% certain. And that's where we talk about there is no tiger is instead of overthinking all the possible things, all those negative reels you put into your mind, you think of, the movie of your life, and you starting to think of everything that could go wrong as soon as you make a decision. I'm going to show my kids this is a good one. So my kids aren't going to come home, or I'm stuck out in traffic, and so I can't get to my kids. And so since I can't get to my kids, they're going to play on the video games, and the video games are going to ruin their mind, and then it's going to ruin their night, and they're going to, end up not being able to go to college, and they're not going to be able to go to college, all because I got stuck out doing something, working hard for somebody. And no, that's not going to happen.
Right.
But we think it is, because we don't play the reel in our mind that, oh, my wife's going to love me so much that my life is going to be just complete. I'm going to be able to make it in my mortgage business, and I'm going to sell 100 houses, or do 100 mortgages this month, or help the real estate agents do whatever they're going to do. We don't think about the positive things.
Right.
We reel all the negative things that could possibly happen, and then that freezes us for making that decision that could really change our lives, and that's where we get stuck.
Why do you think humans are so good at catastrophizing, right? Like, has our lizard brain from back in the Serengeti just trying to avoid the tiger or the lion or the mountain lion or the saber-toothed tiger going that far back? Like, why are humans we're pre-programmed to catastrophize, right? Because I was thinking about that on the drive over here. I was like, well, if I stop at Taco Bell, is he going to beat me to my house for the podcast? And if he beats me to the house for the podcast, he's going to have a bad impression of me. And then we're going to have a bad interview. And then it's going to be and I was like, Jesus Christ, Scott, you're just getting some fucking tacos. Yeah. And I was like freaking out, right? But that's how the human mind goes naturally.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And it's a learned behavior, because we don't wake up. I mean, we wake up as, everybody's putting an impression on us of who we're going to become. So it has to be a learned behavior that we decide that we're going to start thinking about all those possible things that could happen in our mind. And the people, I think, who do the best figure out how to ignore that scenarios of building that scenarios that go all the way. Because if we have enough experience in anything that we do that we're good at, we don't do that anymore with that thing, because we already know what those results are going to be. We catastrophize and we blow up and overthink all the things that we're not sure of. And so instead of having this mindset that, hey, it's possible, you think of like a Michael Phelps, that is the greatest swimmer that probably ever lived. There was at some point where he wasn't worried about whether he was going to win a medal or not. Right. It was like, I'm that good. I've done this much work. I'm the best in the world. I'm not thinking about, well, what happens if my arm, well, so what? I've already won 20 medals. Right. Right. And then he goes and wins however many more that he runs. And the same thing with track athletes, or the same thing with people in the, I mean, it's at some point you get so good and you master what you're doing that you don't think about what possibly could happen anymore. It's that process that we have to start going through that decides, all right, so there's a story that I tell in the book of when I won a sales contest to St. Martin, and everything's going wrong. The limo doesn't pick us up to take us to the airport. The person that's on our team doesn't have their passport. We get to the airport, we can't get out of customs. We get the rental car isn't the right rental car. And now I'm thinking, what are we going to do? We get to the hotel, and at the hotel, they say that our rooms aren't reserved, and so.
Sounds like a standard trip for me, by the way. This is why I don't travel very much.
So I'm in LA at the time. We fly to Florida. We fly to Puerto Rico. We're in St. Martin. So we're like halfway, to me, around the world, right?
Right.
And instead of thinking we're going to figure this out, I'm thinking of all the other things that now that because it started snowballing, that can go wrong. And the man set it up for me, because it was the concierge, because I'm at this point probably yelling at the clerk at the hotel, you're going to find this, we're going to fix it. He comes over there and he just stares me in the eye and he says, "What's wrong with you, man?" And I'm like, "What do you mean what's wrong?" And then I'm ready to go on. And he just dead looks at me and he says, "Here on the island, there are no problems, only inconveniences. And it just hit me like a ton of brick yeah, I guess we're still here. This place is a beautiful place. We're going to figure this out. We're not going to be laying on the beach. They're going to figure out how to get us in somehow, some way. We're going to have an incredible time. But I start thinking that in my mind all the time now when I get so stressed about the things that could possibly happen that I have zero control at. I can just say, these are only inconveniences. And then it just rewires exactly how you think and then how you react to stuff that's happening.
I love that. What's a tactic for when you're getting in your own head and you're freaking out and you're ready to yell at the poor clerk at the counter where it's clearly not their fault, right? It's just like, what's like a good come to moment or an exercise or pinch yourself where it's like, all right, take a breath. It's going to be okay. I'm on vacation. Like, we'll figure it out. Like because I know your book is very tactical. Like what's a good exercise to come out of that headspace of like, I just want to rip somebody's head off?
Yeah, the first one is, like you said, take a breath. We say that all the time, but we don't actually do it.
No, of course not.
We don't actually do it because when emotions are high, intelligence is low, right? So we now have to switch that around. So now bring our emotions down so our intelligence can come high. Because as long as we're in an emotional state, we are not going to be able to make a difference in anything that we're saying. And so taking the time to make the breath. And so when I'm teaching people how to breathe, you literally have to, when we breathe in, I was a PE teacher for such a long time, and your stomach should come out when you take a breath, not come in. And we take these breaths where we suck it in, and then there's oxygen going nowhere, right? So if you take a breath and your belly actually comes out, that means your whole body and all your blood cells and everything are filling up with oxygen. And when they fill up with oxygen, now that your brain is getting what it needs to be able to do stuff and then be able to think straight. So that would be the first part of the technique. The other part of it is if you can immediately put yourself in the shoes of the person you're talking to, is huge, because now you go, okay, if it were me on that end, how would I want this person to talk to me, or how would I react to me? Because immediately, if you have any passion, now you could be a jerk and it doesn't matter, so I can't fix you there, right? But if you are a person that thinks of other people and is willing to serve other people, then as soon as you put yourself in their shoes, your attitude changes immediately, because you go, wait a minute, would I want this person yelling at me? And then how would I handle that if they were yelling at me? And then how do I have an intelligent conversation with this person? Because they could still be wrong, and they could still be that jerk that's on the other side. But I still think, if I were to serve this person today, how would that change who I'm doing? So the book is full of a whole bunch of different techniques that are over time, but in the immediate situation, first thing to do is breathe. Second thing to do is put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're doing. And then after that, now that your brain is now starting to fix itself, then you're looking at, okay, so, I have a sign on my office door that used to say, come to me with your problems. I don't have any issue with that, but bring two solutions at the same time.
Oh my God, that's my favorite thing.
Is it? So if you're in that situation where you're freaking out and then start thinking of the solutions that can help that person solve it. Sometimes you don't know, because you're at it.
Right.
I can't fix that, but if I could come up with a solution that I could present to them, now I'm thinking in the fact of, okay, we're fixing this instead of yelling back and forth and just having in conflict. Now, that doesn't work when you're married and with your spouse, because your spouse doesn't want you to fix anything.
No,
so
no chance.
There's no chance. So do not come up with that solution. If you're if you're in that, then it's just a matter of, okay, I'm listening, because we got 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? So I'm gonna exercise my 2 ears and shut down my mouth, and then hopefully just listen. And then we can come to a conclusion where we're not overthinking, and then we can design it together.
One of my all-time favorite movies is White Men Can't Jump. Mm-hmm. And there's that scene when they're laying in bed and she's like, I'm thirsty. So he gets up to get her the water, and she's like, I didn't want you to get me water. I wanted you to empathize on what it's like to have thirst. And he's like, what are you talking about? If somebody says I'm thirsty, I'm going to get them a drink of water. And she just starts unloading on him. I'm like, oh, this is marriage in like a 90-second clip of a movie if I've ever seen an exemplification of marriage.
It is so much. And, when Woody Harrelson's just like, I got nothing. I can't do anything.
Every guy watches that scene in that movie and just cringes and like, oh yeah, I've been there. I've tried to get better with my wife of like asking her when she's on some rant about something. I'm like, hey, are you looking for feedback here, or did you just want me to hear you? And like, usually she's like, oh, stop playing these psychological games with me. Yeah, tell me what you think the answer should be. And I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure? I don't want to go into solver mode and be in trouble tonight. I don't want to sleep on the couch, which thankfully my wife doesn't make me do. But
and that's such a good thing to do, because even if that's what they want, they have to go and say, okay, yes, just listen to me.
Yeah.
And you can't be in trouble because they realize that you're listening and you're seeing and you're trying to solve whatever it is that we need to do. If it is, I need to get you a drink of water, then I'll be more than happy to go get you a drink of water. If you just want me to sit here, am I right, Renee?
We got a thumbs up from the wife.
Thumbs up from the wife. So yeah, so that is such a great thing to do, because now you're in that solution mindfulness instead of just this emotional craziness high. The other thing is, once that's happened, is to make sure you go through and evaluate what happened and where it turned wrong. Because if you can learn from those mistakes, because you're going to make them, we're all going to make them, we're all going to get 100%. Heated, we're all going to do stuff. But if we can go back afterwards, maybe even jot down, journal. What I found is journaling for me is not always writing on a piece of paper. Journaling might be why I'm on my walk. I figured this out. Now, because I'm not that bright, I guess, is I'm trying to exercise, and I'm trying to listen to podcasts or do something and take notes. And I'm like, I brought my piece of paper and I'm trying to write while I'm walking. That doesn't work. And then I tried to type on my phone. That doesn't work. But I realized I can say, hey, Siri, take a note, put this in the notes and say exactly what I'm doing, and then go back home and listen to it. So I've got that down now. So wherever I'm walking, whatever I'm doing, I have the ability to take notes and just talk to my phone why I'm walking or why I'm doing stuff. So if something happened the day before and now I'm walking in the morning, I want to go through and reevaluate. And sometimes I just turn the recorder on and I walk through it. I don't have to even write it down. It's just me processing it out loud. Mm-hmm. And that's different than processing it inside, because inside, I don't know if there's 2 or 3 different voices that are talking at the same time, and we're multitasking and we're doing all these things. And I think there's some neurological thing that happens. If you've ever driven somewhere and you wake up and you're there, you're driven and you got home, but you don't know how you got home. You don't know when you turned. You don't know because you turned.
Totally zoned out.
You totally zoned out because your brain is working on whatever you're thinking about at the time.
Yeah.
And so your brain has the ability to shut down its automated system low enough. It's still going to get you home, but at the same time, it's working on whatever problems are. Well, when you start speaking, when you're actually talking out loud, you have now focused your brain on figuring out the solution of where you went wrong. If you're thinking about it, your brain's got everything heightened and it's working on all the different sides of it. But when you start speaking, it has to turn on your speaking nodes or whatever it is, your dendrites or whatever, the scientifical,
you already lost me on the science.
So, but it actually, now your brain can only do one thing, and it's in talk and think about what you're saying. And then your reticular activator system goes into your subconscious and really finds a way to begin to help you make sure that doesn't happen again. And usually when that problem comes up again or it's similar, you jump back and you remember exactly what it is that you did, and now you don't repeat it.
Yeah. You mentioned out on the walk trying to take notes and listen to the podcasts and stuff. Myself and our coaching group, we've been trying something recently, just drive in silence. Because I realized you have a Tesla, as do I, and even my truck kind of drives itself now. It keeps in the lane, speeds up, slows down. And I've just found myself driving and listening to a podcast and texting, and I'm like, just too many inputs, right?
Yeah.
And so about a month ago, I started this drive in silence, like no phone, no radio, no anything. And I realized it is terrifying being alone with your own thoughts for 10 minutes. It takes me 10 minutes to drive back and forth from here to jiu-jitsu. And I'm like, I'm freaking out. Like the number of times I wanted to check my phone or turn on the radio or have some type of distraction, just being alone with my thoughts to process the things like you were talking about. It's terrifying because we live in a world of just nonstop, constant, multiple inputs. How do we solve that?
Exactly what you're doing is you think about screens, and people will try to justify, well, I'm not on my phone, but then they turn their iPad, or I'm not on my phone, but their TV is on. So if there is a light behind it and it is shining on you, we have to have moments where we're talking to ourselves, because everything is about relationships, and you truly don't have a relationship with your cell phone. Now, there might be a person on the other end that you're talking to, that you're communicating, and there's sometimes you just need to pick up the phone and call. I think that's one of the things that we don't do a really good job of, is actually calling people and talking to them, because we can't decipher this thing that, the way you text or the way that what your emotions are when you're making a text message doesn't come out on the other side. Mm-hmm. It absolutely does not ever come out. If I jump back to the science, there is a chemical when you're in proximity with people that you actually give off that allows us to reciprocate without talking. It's an actual proven, they call it an aura, sometimes they call it, but there is a chemical reaction in our body. And the problem with, we can get a whole bunch of stuff done on Zoom, but if you've ever been on Zoom for several hours, you are so tired
it's
after the Zoom, because your body is constantly sending out that chemical and it's hitting a screen. And then the screen is bouncing it back to you. And you are not able to fully communicate like we are right now with somebody as a result. And so you are not getting what your body needs. And so there's so many times where we need to just turn off the screen and go be with and have relationship with other individuals, whether it's a spouse, whether it's kids, whether it's colleagues. We need that as human beings. That's how God created us, to have this thing where we need to be in proximity. And the reason we get so tired is we'll spend days on end without any of those relationships. And now our body is, incongruent with who we are and what we're trying to do. And so we can't get refreshed. That's why vacations are so important. I don't know anybody who takes a vacation by themselves.
No.
I assume there might be somebody who does, but
right.
But then that you miss the whole thing of experiencing whatever it is. Like we were in Laguna Beach this last weekend, and Laguna Beach, we were looking at the waves, and Renee was sitting out there just looking over the balcony, and the waves were hitting. But it's a whole different experience when I'm sitting next to her, and we're looking at, what's that over there? What's that over there? Because you get to share those experiences. And so when we stop being able to do that, then we stop our ability to be able to refresh ourselves and to reset ourselves into this point where we can move on.
Yeah, that makes so much sense once you mentioned the chemical reaction between humans, because we've never met before, mm-hmm. but I was more excited to have this conversation in person than anybody who I even know or have a deep admiration for if it's going to be on Zoom. Because I'm like, all right, I'm going to be looking at the computer. I'm going to be trying to keep energy up. It's kind of mind-numbing sometimes. I've done probably I think I do a 4-hour podcast on Zoom right after Afghanistan fell, had a bunch of my friends from the military on a Zoom call. And it was exhausting because, there was no human interaction. There was no pheromones or chemicals or whatever is bouncing back and forth between all of us in the room. That makes a ton of sense. When we started the conversation, you said that you are currently coaching and mentoring. Your goal is to mentor 100 Black men this year. Why is that important to you?
Well, one of the things I went to thank you for asking the question. So I went to a really cool seminar. It was called The Trusted Edge. A guy named David Horsager put this thing together, and he says, we communicate, trust is one of the most important things that we can do. And we lead with trust. And if you can trust somebody, you can be in relationship with somebody, and then all things can happen from that. If you don't trust somebody, nothing happens. And so trust is so important. So I go to this event. It's in Minnesota, 400 people there. It is an amazing event. And I look around the room, and there's like less than 30 people of color in the room. And when I start thinking, why is my community, why are the people that I'm around not able to access this important information? Because if there's a group of people in our country who have trust issues, it's Black men. It just because of all the things that have happened, from slavery to taking men out of house to where we're at now to, even the stuff with Black Lives Matter, we have a trust issue because we have an identity issue. And so one of the things, when I come back home and I'm just saying, okay, I want to give, I want to serve. These are some things that I'm doing, some things that I'm working on. How do I serve my community better? I have another podcast called the Black Wealth Experience. And so I talk about mortgages and buying homes and all that kind of stuff. But what I really got down to is saying, okay, how do we help black men, not just, young black men, but just black men that get to 28 to 30 years old, all the way to 50 years old, who are they're sick and tired and they don't know how to get unstuck. How do they move forward in whatever their life is? And so that's where, started praying about it. And God just said, okay, I want you to work with people of color. And I said, that's cool. I can start doing that. He says, no, I need you to work with black men. I'm like, I don't want to work with just black men. I want to work with all men and all things. He says, no, this is something that could really, truly make a difference. And so out of that, I started the podcast. I started a whole program where we can have, I think about barbershop talks. And if you've ever seen the movie Coming to America, and you see,
best.
Yes, and so they're in the barbershop and they're arguing about Muhammad Ali, and that's the typical black barbershop. That is what it is. But we don't talk about finances. We don't talk about, what do we need to be more healthy, because our life expectancy is like 72 is the average black man lives to be that.
That's like 8 years younger than the national average, I think.
Yes, it is.
There, yeah.
It is. And so we don't talk about identity a lot. We talk about our favorite sports figure. Like I saw several people just the other day wearing, the LeBron James t-shirt, right? Well, your last name's not James. LeBron doesn't know you. LeBron is happy you're coming to his games, but LeBron's got a son that's playing basketball. That's where his time and his energy and his things are going into, right? And so it's great. I'm not saying you shouldn't have somebody, but if your life isn't doing what it's supposed to do, and you're not happy with your life, and you're spending your time living out somebody else's dream, right? Because you're following, more statistics. That's what's really sad. I know more statistics about these athletes and these players and these actors than I do about my own kids. Like I'm watching, I've seen, fathers who will stay home and watch a football game while their kid is over playing, basketball or something else somewhere else. And you just go, oh my gosh. And then, what's been like a constant as I've been doing these podcasts. So I'm at to like 78 podcasts now of black men. It's called the Journey to Freedom podcast. And there's a couple themes. One is I don't know that I can do it until I see somebody else do it, which I don't know why that's a theme, but until I see somebody be president, like Barack Obama, until I see somebody, own a company, or until I see somebody be a doctor or be a lawyer, and be successful at it, it's like I didn't know that I could do it. I didn't know that it was an opportunity. It was an ability to be able to do that. So that's one of the other themes. The other thing that we've really come to grips on, where we've had some crying, emotional moments, is fatherhood. Like I didn't have a father when I was growing up. I didn't know that, what it meant or how to be a father. And then so I had a couple of people who had been in prison during times when their kids were growing up. And then they come out and they want to be fathers. Well, the kids are like, no, you missed that opportunity. And then, or we have spouses or wives or partners who have said, well, I'm not going to let you see your kids. I'm not going to let you, you're going to ruin them if you're around them. So I'm going to, regulate. And how important it is. It's super important for the kids to have a father. I think every kid should have a father, no matter what, hands down, somebody, and sometimes the community takes on that role. But it's just as important for a man to be able to be a dad, because that's how we become the best that we can be, is we have that opportunity to, I guess as our political world is going now, to be able to protect and to be able to help out and to be able to be there and love on and all those things that we get to do, provide for, that we get to do as a dad. That lifts us up and tells us that we can do some things. And so as the men that I'm interviewing have been able to create those relationships, even with adult kids or even with kids that they didn't think, or, and they're saying, wait a minute, I'm a different person because I get to be a dad.
Yeah.
And so the goal is in our the podcast and stuff is to show, this is man after man after man after man, because you said, we've been talking about, you need to see it. So here it is on every walk of life, whether like somebody who's been from prison. I just did Ronnie DeVoe, who's part of Bell Biv and DeVoe and New Edition. So I just, talked to him about the whole, and I don't know if you know the debacle of New Edition where they took all their money. So they didn't have any money.
Why is that so common, man? Like,
I know.
Musicians just get hosed left and right.
Gosh, so he ends up at, 30 years old and has zero. They didn't give him any money when they were as famous as they were. And so his going back into, they're doing some shows and that kind of stuff now. And but all of there's a really cool Netflix, special on New Edition, and how like all of their money, they didn't have any of it, as famous as they were. So, I just did one with him, and there's some NBA basketball players who got into drugs and that kind of stuff that were all part of it. But the whole goal is I'm going to take 14 men to Alabama. This is going to be really cool. So I'm taking them to Alabama at the end of January. So I want to do this trip over and over. It's a civil rights trip. So we can kind of say, okay, this is where we're from. This is where we came from. Now this is where you can go as a result of it. So we'll start out in Birmingham. And I went on this tour. Renee and I went on this tour this last year, and it was just so eye-opening, Alabama, and it feels like you're going back into the 70s because they haven't, they're so segregated still. And you can see the road where the black high school's on, and they told me that the first white student to graduate from that high school was in 2004. There were laws in Alabama in the 1990s that said if you were in an interracial marriage, you could go to jail for 10 years.
Yeah.
And this is in the 1990s.
Well, what's crazy is when I started in the mortgage industry in 2000 after I got out of the Army, Glendale, California, historically was wildly racist, wildly segregated. Now that's not the case anymore. It's a huge melting pot. But I remember I would get a loan documents and a title report. Maybe somebody owned the house for 20, 30 years, and there was still covenants in the title that was like, this house cannot be sold to an African-American.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, obviously the title company immediately removes that, and all of those kind of legacies, the legacy of Jim Crow, that has been removed at least from the housing industry. But I was like, the first time I saw that in a title report, I was like, holy shit, we are only 3 people removed. My dad, my grandfather, my great-grandfather. We're not that far away from just basically a fucked up situation for African Americans.
Oh man. And to say, we are so much better than we were, but it has not been this greatest country in the world for African American, especially men. And, when in the 70s, when we took all these men out of households because of welfare and no jobs, and, you couldn't live with your wife if they were on welfare. So we just literally did all these things. And so you go to Alabama, and it almost feels like you're still there. And so we see that where the church bombing was, and we'll spend some time there, and then we'll do some story stuff. The next day, we'll go over to the Bettis Bridge in Selma and kind of go over where Bloody Sunday was. And one of the things I found out last time that when I was there is that walk from Selma to Montgomery. I was born in Colorado that same week that they were walking. So that was
This is the famous picture of them coming across the bridge.
And then all of a sudden, it just turns into beating everybody. And then they finally walk to Montgomery. And then we'll end up, there's a museum in Montgomery called the Equal Rights Museum. It's a Brian Stevenson. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Just Mercy, where the guy is, he's in jail for 35 years and he never, he was innocent and he did it. Well, he created a whole museum, a lynching museum that starts with the trans-American slave trade and goes into mass incarceration. There's a section there on voting. That we're in here where there was a jar, and they showed all these different ways to stop people from being able to vote. But there's a jar full of jelly beans that says you have to guess how many jelly beans are in here in order for you to vote. I mean, it was stuff you just go, this is unreal. So we'll spend that time really talking about in order to come back and then be able to start transformational groups with barbershop talks, and where the barbershop talks will really talk about, okay, here's how we deal with money. You need to get a home. You've been renting for all this time. You have a really nice car that's parked in front of your apartment complex. It's an $80,000 car, but that $80,000 car is depreciating. Yeah. So now let's figure out, how do we make sure that you start creating some generational wealth? And so, when I do reverse mortgages, one of the things I pull out money sometimes to help families. Like a grandma I did, we pulled out $150,000 out of her equity that's in her home that she bought in the 70s, and we gave $50,000 to 3 different grandkids so that then they could buy houses.
Yeah.
And so now she gets to see why she's alive, wealth starting to be made. So that's a really cool thing to start thinking about in the culture. And then we'll talk about, health. What are some things you're doing with your health? And we'll talk about, so finances, health, identity. Who are you? How did you become who you are? And then where are you going? Then we talk about faith. So identity, faith, health, finance, and trust. So we talk about that whole thing that started this whole thing is, how do we show up and we trust? Because if we don't, then we're behind the 8th ball right there as we get going.
So I'm trying to tie together a couple thoughts, because this is the first time that I've heard somebody articulate this idea of identity issues, right? And I think it's just so vicious when people use the word racist to shut down conversation. And it's like, well, the credit scoring system is racist and banking is racist and all lenders are racist. I'm like, well, I'm one of those. I want to close every loan because I just see green. I don't care if you're a purple people eater, non-binary, African-American midget. Like, I want to do your loan. Like, you got a credit score, we're going to do the loan. That being said, I feel like, and maybe you nailed it here with this identity issue, is there, I'm going to use your words, identity issue in the Black community where it's like, credit is not as important, right? So it's like, if you look statistically across the country, young Black men versus young Mexican men versus young white men versus young Asian men, you can see the graph of where the credit score lies. Now, that itself, because it's just analyzing, did you make your payments or not, that is not racist. But I think a lot of people shut down the conversation that way and saying, well, again, using your words, what's the identity issue that creates a situation where maybe young Black men don't care as much about doing the things that will create a good credit score, which then prevents them from buying a house, which then prevents them from creating generational wealth. So I understand how that all feels systemically racist, per se, to use the catchphrase of the day, but it's not like Equifax is saying, we're out to get you because you're Black and we're going to make your credit score lower. So like, how do we square that circle and come up with a solution instead of just having people yelling at each other and calling each other names?
Well, I love that you asked that because I'll give you kind of an example because you don't know what you don't know. Right. And so you think of where there's systems that prevented folks from getting house. Yeah, when redlining was around, it pretty much said, you can't live in this neighborhood.
Right.
So it wasn't that, it's not the credit. So I go to college, I get a scholarship to go to college. They have the tables, and this is, I don't know, in the 80s, so this is a long time ago, and this is just kind of an example. So they have all the tables that are lined up when you in the commons area or whatever it is. All of these different credit card companies and all these different financial institutions that are trying to get you. So I go to, at this point, it was the Sears table, and they're telling me that I can have $300 of credit, and I can, that way that, as I'm starting my life, this is important to do. That's what they tell me at the table. So I go ahead and I get my credit card at Sears. Well, our family, we didn't ever have a financial conversation at all when I was growing up. Like, I had no clue what even a credit card was. I just know that we had food on the table and that we were growing up, right? So I get my credit card, I go to Sears. Like, my dorm room doesn't look like some of the other kids' room that had some means and, mom and dad showed up and they did it all. My mom and dad were still in Colorado and I'm in California by myself. So I want my dorm room to look as good as their dorm room. So I go to Sears and I use up my whole $300 of credit that first week or two. Then at the end of the month, Sears sends me a bill and they say, you got to pay on this. And I'm like, wait, I haven't graduated. And that was my thought is, it's kind of like my scholarship. It's kind of like, I don't even have a job. How am I supposed to pay you, I don't know, $15 a month or $20 a month?
Yeah.
I haven't even secured it. You gave me this card without knowing how it works or what to do with it.
I'm sure there was no talk about the repayment schedule or the interest rate or anything like that.
Of course not. No, I don't even know. To this day, it's probably in the I have no idea what the interest rate even was.
Yeah.
Only thing I got was them calling. Well, they didn't have the ability to call me on a cell phone because it wasn't cell phones then, right? So they found out whatever, notes come into my mailbox, all that kind of stuff. And I went down to Sears and then I got my education on credit. Well, that happens so much. Where it's not that you can't care about something that you don't understand. And if you've never even thought about owning a house, there's so many people that I've used down payment assistance programs and that kind of stuff to help get into homes that had no clue that home ownership was even possible. And so now that you don't know it's possible, it's possible now. Well, you've been paying rent for 10 years, and this is how much money you've paid in rent. You paid $200,000 in rent. You've done, over this last 10 years. Why didn't you get a house? Well, I didn't think I could. Well, now that you can, this is why it's important, and this is how you're going to feel when you do it. Whereas I think like some of my white counterparts, that was just part of the conversation growing up. Like, you're going to have a house. We're going to help you get a house. We're going to help you with a down payment. We're going to help you. And so as a result, we're going to get you this credit card. We're going to start you off at 16 years old, and this is how important it is. But then the other thing that also happened was that I've seen is parents will say, we're kind of like a joint credit card or something. And then if you get into trouble and you can't pay it off, they're helping make sure your credit stays good. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen in all families, but there are so many families that are successful utilizing credit and what it's for that can now be done. So we're a huge consumer base. The African-American population we're consumers. We're marketed to. We go out, we buy stuff, and we buy stuff that we really can't afford because we're not thinking there's a future. We're not thinking, what is it, when I become a dad? Now, that's changing, and we're getting a lot more classes, but you'd be amazed at how many home buying seminars that I do, and I'm sitting down with people who have never even heard that or even believe it's possible to buy a house. Or, so I have credit. Yeah, well, I've even had people who have never had credit. Just going, you're like 30 years old and you've never had it.
So how do you, where's the grassroots operation? Because I'm a pretty hardcore libertarian, so in my opinion, the government ruins everything. We can argue about that on a different podcast. But where's the grassroots organization or that shift of identity to, and we'll just say young black men, because that's who you're serving, now have an identity of financial literacy? Do we have to go way back and it starts in the home when they're 5 years old? Is there a way to get them when they're in high school, when you're a high school coach? Is there a college curriculum? Is it because I've seen this thing where Chase Bank is doing a outreach to schools with, who's the short comedian? Kevin Hart.
Kevin Hart.
Thank you. Kevin Hart's doing a big financial outreach program with Chase, but I'm like, I don't really trust the banks to be educating kids because they just wanted to be consumers and go into massive amounts of debt. And Chase is the one signing them all up for $75,000 student loans they can't repay. So I don't know if that's the best option. But where does the education start from so you can shift that identity to financially literate young men instead of financially illiterate young men?
I think there's a couple places. One, an organization like the NAACP is putting, if we can get people who understand it and know it. I want to get into barbershops. I want to get into sports teams and that kind of stuff where young African-American kids are. So, let's say you're playing a little league sport and when you're going to the pizza thing and you're talking about it and there's mentors and there's people around that can do it. It starts in the home. If I can get mom to own a house, and then now mom's going to talk about owning a house. If I can get dad to own a house and they're not going back to the apartment, that's a good thing. It has to be a curriculum in schools. How do we have, I'm not going to say, I was a teacher and, I think education is one of the best things that we can ever do. But how do we have a school curriculum in our country that teaches us math, science, English, social studies, I guess social studies.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. But how do you have that and you don't talk about money?
It's crazy.
Because, when people say, well, money's not that important to me, obviously you don't have any because it's up there with oxygen because it allows you to do the things you want to do in life. That's how important it is. It's something you think about every single day. It's something that you spend. If you have a place to live, then you have electricity and you are paying every minute. Money is going out of your pocket to pay for electricity, pay for all the things that you have. There's not a day that you don't interact with money, and yet it's not part of the curriculum from kindergarten all the way through. You're going to teach me how to add 5 plus 5, but you're not going to tell me how to exchange money and how to exchange dollars. We have to have that into if we're going to have our kids go to school, then it has to be where it's happening in homeschools. Homeschools are teaching about money. Just our public schools aren't teaching about money, and so that curriculum is beginning to happen, but it's been for the kids who, let's say it's in high school, it's an elective. Well, no, it's not an elective. It is a mandatory class, just like English is. And then in our colleges, we need to do the same thing. So, when that table goes out, we have somebody who's talking about, here's what you do with the things that you're doing with, your education. And I believe, and then it's going to be in homes as we progress, and then we're buying more homes, and then we actually go to the car lot, and we're going, okay, so this is the proper way to look at a car. This is how you look at, can I really afford this? Can I not afford this? Mm-hmm. And then that's part of just that conversation and identity, because we got to go back to identity. Excuse me, let me trick this.
Yeah, you're good.
So when we think about our identity, a lot of black men just don't believe they're enough. They've been told they're not enough. They've been told they're not good. They've been told that they can't do things. And now we go, okay, no, you are God's greatest gift. You are a person who can do just about anything you want to do, and we have to believe it. But how many of our, I don't know hardly any black kids now that don't have a family member that's incarcerated somewhere, that doesn't know somebody who's incarcerated somewhere. And then you look at our inner cities and, sometimes it's their parents, it's their grandparents, it's their mom, it's their dad. And so that their identity comes out going, okay, who am I? And now the people or those of us who are doing okay financially and owning homes and having a pretty good life, we have to give back. We really do. We have to serve. We have to say, this is what I've done, because it more than I could ever believe. It's folks are saying, I have to see it first. How many black doctors have I been to in my life? How many black attorneys have I had in my life? How many, obviously we've had one black president and possibly another one coming up, but for the most part, in most of the, how many black bankers that we go to, how many, when I look at our mortgage industry and, I look at the real estate industry, I know there's folks that are there, and those are the people that I'm trying to interview. Those are the people that we have to shine, that just shows this is possible. Because you only have to see it once that it's possible. How many race car drivers? I mean, when we think about our athletics, obviously we think, oh, we can all be athletes, and that's what everybody's striving to be, but not everybody's going to be an athlete, right?
Yeah.
And that comes from when I look at, well, of course it is. I mean, when we think of, slavery, and we brought the best of the best came over on boats, and we put them together, and they were bred together, and now we're seeing the fruits of that in our athletics. And then we see it in our, our famous folks that we see, but that's not the future of most of us. The future isn't going to be the 1% athlete that is just amazing and great. And then we try to, like I said before, we try to live our lives almost through some of those athletes because we don't believe we're enough. But if I can be a great dad and I can serve others, I can have an amazing life.
Yeah. Years ago, this is a random tangent. Years ago, I was at a comedy club, and we went to this comedy club, and they did their whole sets and whatnot. And then we were just getting ready to leave, and the host comes back, and he's like, hey, we have a special guest here. If you guys are willing to stick around, he's working out some material for an HBO special he's going to do. So we all sat back down. It was Chris Rock. And Chris Rock had that joke in that HBO special where he's like, we're 8% of the population, we're 80% of the Final Four. There's a reason. But then the funny thing, which this joke did not translate into HBO because he was on stage, he pointed at a bunch of people in the audience. He's like, but it ain't going to be you. It ain't going to be you. It ain't going to be me. I'm 5'9", and it was hilarious. He's like, we better find something else to do. And for some reason that stuck in my mind, right? Because I'm not black, obviously. I was never a great athlete. But if that's your model, if that's what you see, I can understand why that family was like, yeah, no, he's not going to be a high jumper. He's going to make it in the NBA. That's where the big money is. We wanted to play basketball. And it's like, I could feel the pain when you were telling that story of like, I'm trying to shift this kid's identity because I see what he's actually exceptional at, and you just weren't able to break through to the family on that. How do you break through to a young man? Because, I was a young man once, and I knew everything, and I was an asshole, and I was going to live my life exactly the way I thought I should. Some of that turned out well. Some of that did not turn out well. How do you break through to a young man who maybe only has this one mental model of who he's supposed to be or who he's allowed to be or who he looks up to because he doesn't feel like he's enough? Like, how do you start to rework that mental model at the age that you get them, somewhere between 15 and 25?
To me, it's experience. What do we get to help you experience while you're younger? What different things, like, have you been to a ski slope? Have you been out on a boat skiing? Have you been, to a banks, or have you been to, award banquets, and, all the things that we see happening in young children's life that are successful. If a success leaves clues, and you can see how people have matriculated to the being okay in life and having these upper middle class or wealthy lives. What were their experiences they go through, and how do we duplicate some of those experiences? I can't have you have an experience of a dad who makes $300,000 a year, doing whatever he is as a banker or as just an engineer or something like that. But can I take you to an Apple? And can I show you the black men who are at Apple that are doing really well? Or can I take you to, a science museum where somebody's doing, or can I get you into an engineering, curriculum type thing where you can start seeing, engineers that are doing stuff? Can I take you to where we see lawyers and watching court cases and that kind of stuff? So the more experiences that any child has, black, white, red, whatever it is, the more opportunities that they can start seeing themselves in those opportunities. And I think what we do in some of our communities, even in like some of our middle class, is we give them, and a lot this happens in African-American families, we give them the experience of being an athlete. That's what we give them the experience of. But how many are in the chess club? How many, if I go to a chess tournament, how many young black kids do I see playing in the chess tournament? very few, but I see a whole bunch that are not really good athletes, on the basketball courts trying to be,
right.
Or I'm starting to even see them at swim meets now. It's like, okay, so yeah, you don't even like swimming, you hate swimming, but you love to put Legos together. So why aren't you in the Lego contest? And so it's up to those of us who are doing stuff to say, okay, what experiences can you give your kids that are going to help them be well-rounded so they can begin to see what it is that they can do, what it is that they can achieve. And then you have to talk to them like a lot of other, hey, you're wonderful, you're great, you're amazing. I love the way you did this. I was just, with my grandchild this week, and my son-in-law is a principal at a high school, and my daughter is a pre-K teacher. And so, my kids, my grandkids are getting some really good, experiences. They go camping all the time. I mean, how many black families do you see at the campground and campers and that kind of stuff?
Not many.
And so, but just to talk to little Jalen, and, he's showing me, he's got some kind of app for Legos where he throws all his Legos on the floor, takes a picture of it, and then it says, okay, based on what you got, here's all the things that you can make. And so he's 9 years old, and he's literally looking at this app, and he built a spoon, and he's built a truck, and he's building all these things, and he's doing that on his own. So I'm thinking, this is great. Yeah, you're going to go play flag football, and you're a really good athlete, and you're going to be really good at it. But at the same time, you're over here figuring out how to map Legos together to build a castle. If we can get our kids in those experiences all the time, then we don't have this race issue. We don't, because they have opportunities and they know that they can do it.
You mentioned something, and I've read a couple books about this because I wanted to make sure I wasn't completely ignorant on the topic. You talked about the social policies, which I don't think were inherently evil, and they just had unintended consequences that people didn't think through. But you mentioned the social policies of the 1970s that specifically decimated the African-American family. I think prior to 1965, the divorce rate was actually higher or the single parent rate was actually higher amongst white families versus black families. Divorce rate was higher for white families versus black families. And now it's just gone off the rails the other direction. Can you talk a little bit that from either a historical standpoint or the lasting legacy now, 50 years later, where we've got 70% of young African-American kids with no dad in the home? I can't imagine not seeing my kids every day. And I also think one of the best predictors of upward social mobility is having two parents. I don't care if they're straight parents, gay parents, grandparents, uncle, some type of mentor. You got to have two people helping raise that kid. So can you talk a little bit through that?
Absolutely. So one of the things that were kind of if you look at the 30s and 40s, the African-American family was solid. There was segregation, but they were solid. The kids were learning, they were growing, they were in school, they were doing something. And we get into the 60s, and then the Brown versus education happens, and then we said, okay, we have to desegregate schools. We have to put everybody together. The problem is when we started busing kids, they were being bused to schools where the teachers and the education staff didn't believe that they were worthy of getting an education. So they sat in the back of classrooms. They didn't get the same education that the white students were, even though that they were forced to segregate. So that became a big issue. Then when we had the housing laws that happened in 1960 with Lyndon B. Johnson, then that's where we started giving people housing, where the welfare system became really. But we said as a country that if you are a two-parent home, you can't access the welfare system. You can't access. And there was a time there where there wasn't very many jobs, where there was, like the Jim Crow laws and the laws. There were housing developments with redlining where there was in Chicago, there was literally a wall that was 3 miles long that separated, that was 10 feet high, that separated black families from white families.
Yeah, the foundation of that wall is still in the middle of the street. You can go walk it. It's crazy.
It is crazy. So there wasn't jobs that were available. We said, okay, here's the house you can live in. You don't have transportation, but the place you got to work is 15 miles away. So there was all these groups of men that weren't able to work, that weren't able to provide for their families, weren't able to feed. They wanted to work. They went to work when they could, but then they couldn't marry their, the people that they were having kids with, or the women.
Because then the government would have taken away any type of social welfare system.
Yep. Any money that was going in the government took it away. It said you can only live, and so I don't know. It was a way systematically to separate families, and so now the families are separated. And then in the early '80s, Reagan comes in, and then we're doing the war on drugs. So now they're in these communities. They're not doing anything. They're using marijuana. They're selling marijuana. They're selling crack. They're using crack. And all of a sudden, we're rounding up every African American man possible. And we're putting them into the prison system. And that's where the mass incarceration, came in, where there's a whole bunch of people that probably should have been there, but there's a whole bunch of people who shouldn't have been there. So now we've separated the homes from moms taken care of by themselves, dad's in prison, or dad's not able to work, dad can't come to the house, and then
dad's not allowed to live in the house because then they lose that social safety net, which is probably what they needed to get back on their feet if they were a married couple. But now you take away a potentially two income household, you strip that away at its core in order to get the social safety net, and now the social safety net is all you have.
Yep. Yeah, and so now we move into
back to my comment on the government being the root of all evil. This is like my libertarian brain just is blowing up right now. Anyway, I digress. Sorry.
Yeah, no, because it's what has happened, and so now we fight, and then whether it's redlining, when you think about World War II and vets coming home from World War II, and then the VA loans that were available. You're going to love this statistic. So out of the VA loans that were available, I think they gave out 13,000 loans in 1 year to vets. How many do you think were to black men?
I'm scared to guess. Two
loans out of 13,000 went to black men to be able to get VAs. We were not able to use the system. And so now you think of the system of owning a home, then being able, you pass away, then your kids get the home, and then you move forward, and then, now you understand what home ownership is and all that kind of stuff. Did not happen. I'm part of a group called NAREB, which is National Association of Real Estate Brokers, which is we call ourselves realtists because we weren't allowed to be part of any associations in the 50s. And in the 60s, that would allow us to sell real estate. In fact, we weren't even allowed to sell real estate to white folks, And so all those things that were part of systems that, like you said, whether they were designed to just keep people out or whether they're designed to make sure that, because we have this belief in our country that there's a finite amount of resources. And if I let you have the resources, then it's going to take away from me. I don't absolutely believe that. I think technology figures out a way to take resources and make them better for everybody.
Yep.
But if we walk in with this belief that there are no resources, and so if we have to fight over the finite amount of resources, and human nature is I got to protect my family first, and once my family's taken care of, then I'll think about your family. But until that's taken care of, you get nothing.
Yeah.
And so as a result of not having homes and having to live in this whole thing, we fast forward 50 years and we say, okay, we're just behind. Mm-hmm. We are truly behind in what we had as opportunities, what we had as access. You're in Nevada. I'm not sure what the statistics are in Nevada, but in Colorado, we're at 38% of African Americans that are eligible for home ownership that own homes, whereas our white counterparts are at 70%. And so there's a huge gap, and there's just something about owning a home that is way different than renting a home and having somebody that's your landlord and having the responsibility. And and I have people who will tell me all the time, well, what if my water heater goes out? Well, then you get a new one, if you own a home. Well, then there's no landlord to give my personal water heater. But that's the mentality that the belief is that even if I owned a home, I couldn't afford a home.
Yeah.
And you try to tell somebody, well, you've been paying for that water heater. It's just in your rent. I promise you the landlord is not.
Landlord's not losing money.
He's not losing money. He has some set aside out of what you pay him every single month. So if your water heater goes out, he can replace it. Yeah. It's just he has a system where he has money in the bank, or he has money set aside, or he has credit, or he has different things that you just don't know enough about. And your belief system that you're not enough is, you can help me get a house, but what if? And then they go into there is no tiger, right? What are all the scenarios that could happen if I own a house? And if I do get it, what happens if I lose it? Yeah. So it's like I said, we're just behind as we're catching up. And so the goal is okay, how do we begin to teach these things with experience? I want your family to talk about, when I come over to your house after we purchase the house, I want your kids sitting at the table too. even if they have no clue what we're talking about, it's something that's going to be imprinted in their brain that says, Mom and Dad were talking to somebody about finances. Great. So then when you get to be 20 years old, then you're not scared to call somebody to talk about finance. First, you have to trust them.
Yeah.
And there's this lack of trust because of all the things but I don't want to live in that. We can't continue to live in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
We have to move forward in the way. I'm not going to say none of that stuff happened, and it's sad that it happened.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say this was a great country for African Americans. Half of me, my grandma grew up on a reservation, and so in Oklahoma, so I even know what it is like for the Native Americans. It's even crazier when we start thinking of what happened to the Native American population. But I can't live. I have to understand it. That's why we're taking a group of men to Alabama. I have to know where we came from. I have to think of the fight. What did it take to if we can trace back our ancestry to Kentucky and slavery in Kentucky and even back from the ship. But what did it take to be on a boat for 2 months to be able to make it to America, and then to be, a slave, to be able to withstand that and work through that and still be able to procreate and have, and then to be able to get into the 70s and the 30s and the 40s and 50s. And, my grandparents had to go through to be able to do it. We got stories and stories. How can I just sit and go, wait a minute, after all the work they did, how do I not now progress? How do I not move forward? How do I not write a book? How do I not talk to, go to seminar? How do I not take men and people to these places so that I can now say, you got this. You can do this. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, but you're working towards serving others. And my prayer every day is, dear Lord, give me the wisdom to do the things that you put me on this earth to do that pleases you and serves others. If I can do that, and I can do it in my community where I get to talk about it every day, then we're going to make, it's going to be inroads. It's going to be, when we get to the barbershop, we're not talking about whose name we're putting on our back, right? We're talking about what's your identity and why do you feel that way? How do you treat your wife? We have, that's in all races that have an issue of how do you treat your spouse, right?
True statement.
So
my wife's Mexican. They have to start talking about how they treat their husbands, but that's a different podcast.
Well, mine, she's Puerto Rican.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, you got the same thing.
Yeah, so I got the same thing. It was funny. We were in Alabama last time, and in the segregation section, there were signs that were during segregation. So her dad is family's from Puerto Rico, her mom's family's from Mexico. And there was a sign that said, no Negroes, no Puerto Ricans, no Mexicans. I'm like, you're twice as much not able to go into here than I was. But yeah, so when we think about how do you treat your wife, what are the things that you do to make sure that you're doing what you can? How do you be a dad that you never saw growing up? What does that mean to be a dad? How much time do you need to spend with your kids? Because they don't care how much money you make. They don't care. They just want the time. They don't even care about the mistakes you make. Dad, can you just sit here and read with me?
Yeah.
And if you're divorced and you have a spouse that, or you had a spouse that is no longer your spouse, that has to be separate from what's going on with your kids. And you have to fight like whatever you have to fight with to be with the kids. And in most cases, if they see you fighting like that, they're not trying to stop you. It's when they think you're not doing what you're supposed to do and you're not. But if you're there every week and you're picking up from school and you're doing all those things that are tough, then we're talking about how to be a dad. When we talk about money, we need to sit down. What's a budget? Okay, what does your budget look like? How much of your budget is going out on spending things? How much of your budget is saving? How much of your budget is looking towards the future because your kids have a future and you're going to need to help them? Am I saying you have to pay for their college? No, you don't have to pay for their college, but you have to be there when they go to college. You have to be there and say, hey, let me just take you out to dinner or something. Those are things that we haven't done a good job on. And then this whole thing on trust is, how do we start with trust and being able to trust the systems that have been created now? How do we trust the people that we interact with? When I go to a grocery store now, do I start thinking and looking around? Are they looking at me like I'm going to steal something? Or do you walk in like you're supposed to be there? And you're not thinking about the things that happened 30 years ago or 20 years ago. Some of that stuff still happens. I mean, there's still many places. I've been to Alabama. There's still places that, it's tough and it's not the ideal place. And there are still some systemic things that need to be changed. The conversation I don't ever want to have, I don't want to have that conversation with my grandsons that I had to have with my kids about the police and, if they show up in our neighborhood. Because when they were in high school, we lived in a pretty nice neighborhood. And every time they were not every time, but many times they were walking home. What are you doing here? Yeah. Why are you here? Do you belong here? Like, my house is right there. I mean, so that conversation is, don't argue. Those things that you have to have because you have to be careful. Yeah. I don't want to have that conversation with my grandsons, and I don't think I need to. I think our society is changing, not as quick as we want to, but it is changing. There are people like, having this conversation with you that we get to talk about and say, yes, I don't want to blame it all on the things that have happened and say, I am who I am because of that. There are internal reasons and there's external reasons. And the external reasons are things that are out of my control. And that's not the reason I'm not succeeding. The reason I'm not succeeding is because of me and who I am and my identity. Yeah. And if I can change who I am and my identity, then that is not a contributing factor, but it's an internal factor that now allows me to be able to move forward, because there's outliers everywhere, right? And so that's the lesson. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about that, what's that internal factor? I can say, hey, yes, that did happen, but that's not the reason I'm not successful. Yes, I didn't, I grew up and, people were mean to me and they wrote, names on my thing, and that's not the reason. I'm at a bank and they don't like me at the bank that I'm at, and, so I'm not allowed to borrow the same amount of money that my white counterpart. Well, that's not the reason. That's not something that you can control. What are the things that you can control internally? And how can you change your identity so that, and if you can create relationship, oh my gosh, if I could teach the African-American community, Black men, if I could teach anybody how to have great relationships, life is going to be good.
Yeah. How do you rebuild that trust in the system or educate having a relationship to get back to that nuclear family, right? Where it's like there is a mother and a father in the household, which just makes everything exponentially easier. Finances, raising kids, getting them to practice, all that stuff is just easier if there is two human beings. It seems like an insurmountable task, like the damage societally, and this is for all populations, not just the Black population. It just seems like lack of trust in the institution of marriage, and it just seems so rotted to the core. Like, how do we fix that?
We fix it one family at a time. We fix it by making examples of when it's done well and not examples of when it's not. We can't trust systems. I mean, we have a government. We can try to change systems, but systems are getting exactly what they were designed to do. If the system was designed to keep, to only give, welfare to moms because we didn't have enough money, whatever it is, it did an incredible job of doing that. When you think of the other systems, whether it was redlining was designed to keep communities the way that they were, and it worked. The systems of today, when they say, okay, we got to get rid of affirmative action and we got to get rid of DEI. I think that's the big one right now, right? No, DEI. Well, if your company's doing what they're supposed to do and they're just hiring people that are qualified, then DEI isn't the issue. But if you're not giving opportunities, my dissertation was on hiring Black administrators in schools. And when I did that dissertation to get my doctorate, when I was talking, and it was mostly, talking to, educators who have made it into principalships or presidencies or, and saying, what did you have to go through to move here? And the biggest thing was a lot of the things we're asking, or a lot of the questions in the job search were asking for things that I couldn't do. Like they would say, you need to have 10 years of experiences in administration. And that school district had 2 Black administrators for the last 10 years. Well, where do you get 10 years of experience if you don't have the opportunity to do it? So it was based on experience versus potential. So we have to bring in people that can now get the experience so that they can get the job. Because if your whole, the county had jobs like that the same way. Our county, we want to hire from within first. So we want to hire, somebody who's been with the county for 10 years in these certain positions. And then you look at the county, and hasn't ever been one Black African American in any of those positions. So how are you going to hire from within if that's your job description? Well, that's a system. I'm sure somebody wasn't thinking, somebody wasn't going, this is a great idea. So that's what DEI does, is it allows to think about those situations. And so if we eliminate all the DEI, okay, that's great. But what are you doing to make sure that there's an equal playing field? Because that's all people are asking for is an opportunity.
So tell me how we balance that, right? Because like I cringe when I hear DEI because in my mind, it's like, okay, we're taking race or sexual preference or whatever over qualifications. And you don't strike me as the type of person that doesn't want unqualified people in a job. So how do we balance that? Yes, we want to give people opportunity, but we also don't want to promote them over their skill set just because the intangibles of the color of their skin or who they like to sleep with or whatnot. Like, I think that's the forever trade-off. Like, how do you balance that, right?
Well, I believe there has to be a realization that those folks haven't had the opportunity to have the same opportunity to have the experience. So is there somebody, and is there somebody with the same skill sets that have those skill sets? Because you absolutely, if you're going to, be an engineer and design stuff and you don't have the ability to design stuff and to do the thing, you shouldn't be there just because of your color or your, whatever it is. But at the same time, does that person, if they've been through school and they've had, you see them, job application after job application after job application. And there's all the studies that say, okay, when people just subliminally look at an application and it says, Johnson or Brown or some, Shaquilla Brown or something like that, it just gets thrown in the pile. So we have to take the name off the application so that we can actually look at skill sets. And if we're doing that, then I don't have any problem if you're doing it. But the problem is these systems have just been so intermixed in how we hire folks and how we bring people on. And you're going to, if I'm a dad and I own a company and I have my kids, well, my kids are probably going to work for my company, right? And they're going to get passed up. Maybe that's what you want to call nepotism, you call them whatever it is, but they're my kids, they're going to do it. And so, because that's my legacy that I'm giving. And so we have to, within these systems, start saying, okay, what is it that our true goal is here? And then if we are doing some things that are not giving the opportunity, how can we fix that? And when I see, the pendulum can swing both ways. If we get so far on DEI that, every hire has to be, a person of color, or a person because we don't have any people of color, then okay, let's look at our hiring practice. What's broken in our system? Right. And then if we can fix the system, or change the system, then we're not having to do all this education over here because the system is allowing for that pendulum swing.
Speaking of the pendulum swing, have you heard of the felony dilemma in California with the job applications? So every job application I ever filled out till I was 30 years old in California had a little box. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? And then I think it was the NAACP stepped in and said, well, this creates disparate impact for black men who are more likely to have been incarcerated because once you check that felony, almost nobody's hiring you. Okay, cool. So they made it a state law that you got rid of that box saying that you had a felony. Well, guess what happened? Now that you don't have that piece of data, anybody looking at a job resume was like, black men, I'll just assume he has a felony. So now no black men got a shot at jobs. And it's like, I totally understand the feeling and the essence of like passing that law, but then it had these horrible unintended consequences of the pendulum swinging back the other way. And it's like, I think of that one little tiny example where I'm like, this is such a complicated issue. I have no idea where to even start to fix it.
Oh yeah, because you go, okay, so what is the solution? Because am I going to, as an employer, what's the stigmatism of having a felony? Right. What is the felony? Was it hey, they were in jail because they smoked marijuana. It's totally legal now. Yeah. So if they were in jail,
dude, the fact that there's anybody still in jail over marijuana, there should be like 1 million people let out of prison tomorrow that are non-violent offense drug users. I'm like, it is crazy to me that I walk down to the strip and you can't walk 5 feet without getting a contact high. And somehow we still have people in jail for marijuana. It's like, it makes my skin crawl. It makes me so mad. Anyway, sorry.
No, exactly. And so what are my hiring practices on hiring folks that have been incarcerated? Yeah. Because if I'm never going to hire anybody who's ever been incarcerated or believed to have been incarcerated, then I'm never giving an opportunity. And there are some jobs that probably, it's not the right place to have somebody, and you don't know if they're innocent or not. But I would say like all these decisions are reversible. So I can start to hire people. I can start to trust people because trust has to go both ways, right?
Yeah.
So I have to say, okay, let's look at the character of the man. He's been out of jail for 10 years. He's got a family. He lives with his kids. He's doing everything he possibly can do. Why can't he work for me? What is it that I'm requiring in my job that it says that this man, now if he has been a thief and he's, been incarcerated 3 or 4 times for robbery and that kind of stuff, I probably don't want him working at the bank. Yeah. And just tempting him. But he could sure work in landscaping.
Yeah, you don't want to have an alcoholic be your bartender.
Exactly.
Like that's it's a bad decision.
It's a bad decision, but that doesn't mean he can't be in the front of the house doing something else. I mean, so I think our hiring practices have to change a little bit, where we're really thinking about, okay, so who do I want into my company? And if this is who I've been hiring, why? And asking those questions. And then if there's an ability to start bringing folks on that we can say, okay, we want this to change. And I guess that there has to be a belief that, what I have is a little bit different. I was just at a meeting. It was a fundraising event for a really cool organization called New Life, which is they help with addictions and they help with, whatever this is in New Life to help people get back on their feet because they've made mistakes in life. But at the fundraising event, I look like I did in Minnesota, I look around the room, and Renee and I are the only people of color in this room. And this is how they've been doing things for years. And I kind of challenged him. I said, so if I want to have a person of color who has an addiction issue coming to your system, what does that look like for him? Will they ever see anybody that looks like them, or will it be the white savior guy who's got this thing where they got to save the black man from his own addictions? Yeah. And so, and that was my challenge to them as we go, because it's a great event and we got to enjoy this amazing thing by the beach. And, but why am I the only person of color that got invited to this event? To be able to give them money.
I get invites to a lot of those events too. And I'm like, mortgages aren't where they were a couple of years ago. So stop inviting me to those events.
Exactly. But at the same time, I'm honored that you invited me.
Right.
But I have a whole bunch of colleagues that are doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And we have a whole segment of groups of men that could benefit from all this research you've done for the last 50 years that are helping people. So why are we not in this?
Yeah. So I'm 45. You said you're almost 60. I don't know. I go to jiu-jitsu in the morning. It's the most mixed bag of people you've ever met. Socioeconomic, black, white, transvestite, although I don't think you're allowed to say that anymore. Sorry. It is such a mixed bag. And then my wife's Hispanic, been very ingratiated by their giant Hispanic family. I grew up in LA. We moved up to Vegas about 3 years ago. So until I moved to Palmdale, which has a lot of race issues, the idea of like racism was just not really on my radar. Mm-hmm. Like I remember when I was moving in high school from Glendale up to Palmdale, one of my dad's friends was like, oh yeah, man, because of all the HUD housing boom and bust, they have like a real racism problem or a real racist problem up there. I'm like car racing? And he was like, no, you fucking idiot. He's like black and Mexican and white. And I was like, oh, okay. So this didn't seem as much on my radar, even though I had plenty of Iranian friends and Armenian friends and Asian friends and black friends. And it does feel, maybe I'm just getting grumpy old man, get off my grass. It does feel more polarized now than it felt 30 years ago when I was 15. Am I just making that up in my head, or has the political discourse got more venomous and ugly? And now because of social media, they can drill down to District 13 in Ohio, and we need to appeal to these 2,000 black single moms to win the vote that's going to sway the national election. And I'm just like, this is crazy. And so like the ads for them look different than the ads for me and whatnot. Do you feel like race relations in America are getting better or worse?
Race relationships are being exposed more than they ever have before. When we were growing up, we were in communities, and whatever communities that we were in, like when the street light comes on, everybody got to go home, right? And you hung out with whoever, more social economic than race split. Well, you were also in Southern California, which was more of a melting pot than the rest of the country.
Right.
You moved to Palmdale, I have a friend named Maurice Wire that I went to high school with that lived in and grew up in Palmdale, and he used to tell me stories about
very segregated.
Very, very segregated in the sides of the track. And, in the Fresno, where my mom grew up in by Fresno in Hanford and Lemoore in California, and very segregated. There were literally railroad tracks that separated the two. But folks got along, and because you were in community and you didn't have exposure to the entire planet. Like right now, even a thing I talk about a little bit in the book is we are trying to control problems around the world that we have no business trying to. Me as an individual living in Denver, I'm worrying because the news is showing me all this. I'm worried about a problem that's all around the world that, I should be, concentrated on the community that I live in. And so what's happening now is I think there's more of like an awakening of these are the issues. Like before I went to Alabama, I had no idea. Before I went to Louisiana, I had no idea. Before I went to the South, and then I'm talking to men from the South, and their experiences are so much different. I didn't have access to people in the South when unless we took a big family vacation or trip or something like that. And realizing that these problems now, you take that person that was in the South, and now he's doing a whole bunch of work in California, doing a whole bunch of work in Nevada, but he's still bringing his community or his identity or who he is into that community as bucking up against. And I think we're years away from it all coming back around, but it is absolutely more tense and more and we also have a generation of kids who, for whatever reason on social media, believe everything that they see on social media.
Right.
So it only takes one thing, and they're not afraid to say what they think all the time. There is no filter. And no filter means that you really are not thinking about the other person across the table ever and about how they feel and how it's going to affect them and and you're not serving them, you're bucking up against them. And so we see something that's not true on social media. It was it was never true. Now it's the God's, truth, and it's happened, and now I'm going to attack you for it. Because when I'm in front of you, I'm not going to say something about you that's mean or evil. But when I'm on social media,
it's the worst.
I'll rip you. When I was teaching the high school, about 6-7 years ago, that was our worst issue, is what was said to each other when you went home. And then we had fights almost every morning in school, and I was at an inner city school that, they would just rip each other, just stuff that wasn't even close to being true, but they saw it on social media, and then they come to school ready to go, and that's their reality.
Yeah, the keyboard warriors drive me bonkers. Like, I've had some people say some things to me on social media, and they know me personally, where I'm like, A, that's not true about me, and B, you would never say that to my face, ever. And it just, the vitriol just feels so amplified by the online message.
Yeah, we have to move to, and I don't usually say the word have to because we don't have to do anything, really, but we have to figure out this thing about relationships. That if we don't solve relationships, our split is going to, our divide is going to even get bigger. It's going to be social economic lines are going to go like this, but just our lines on humans as each other and who we can speak to and talk to, this gap is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's so much, these algorithms drive me nuts because just in this political world that we watch, I've been trying to watch both. So I'll watch a CNN, I'll watch a Fox News, I'll watch some independent stuff, and I'm listening to what our candidates are saying, and trying to listen to them. But then when I watch the news, it's not even close. So how do you make any decisions when you're only getting fed what the algorithm says you're supposed to get fed, and then you get angry about something that was taken so far out of context, it was taken so far out of what reality is, or you got somebody who, because they have a microphone and can talk and people can believe what they're saying, is they start following that person because they're looking for real relationship, right?
Yeah.
And so they go, oh, that makes sense. I believe that.
Like, Kamala Harris is not a communist and Donald Trump is not a Nazi, okay? Like, Kamala Harris wants to be rich, and Donald Trump was married to a Jewish woman. He has like 2 Jewish kids. And I'm like, these two things are not true, but somehow like that ends up being the headline. And I'm like, dude, this is not helping anyone.
Over and over again. It's not just what it becomes the narrative of how we believe. And then some people who aren't informed that just hear a soundbite because they were working all day, happen to turn on a commercial or whatever it is that the advertising, and they're yelling. Just go, wait a minute.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned something a couple of times, which I think is worth saying, the socioeconomic divide, right? So it's like, if you look at, you mentioned Obama, his kids probably never going to have the same experience of like some poor white kid living in a trailer in Appalachia. But obviously, demographically, blacks have less wealth than whites. So what are the steps to just making black people wealthier, right? Because I think that solves so many problems. You're wealthier, you have access to more experiences, like you said, the vacations, the science museums, my son, who I didn't meet till he was 15, he had never been on a plane until we met. And I was like, that was so foreign to me, but he grew up basically poor in Long Island. And he had never been on a flight until we met each other. So it's like, that's just an experience that he didn't have. He wasn't exposed to people that could afford to go vacation in Hawaii or whatnot. So one of the things I've done over the last 6 years since I met him when he was 15 is like, we're just trying to expand his mindset of like what the opportunities are out there. So just, a super simple question. How do we make the black community more wealthy?
Yeah. A lot of it is, like I said, exposure to experiences. One is get rid of the belief that money's not important because you don't have it. It is so important. It's something that you do. And then begin to teach about how money works. Because if people understand how money works and they feel like they have the opportunities and their identity says, I can do anything. You mentioned, Barack Obama's daughter. She started a clothing line and she's a movie thing and she's worth like $100 million right now. There's no way she's ever going to, but how much exposure did she have?
Of course. By
her dad and the rest of the United States. It's impossible for them not to have those experiences. And so how do we create those experiences within the families? Home ownership, I think, is where we start, because I think home ownership is one of those things that changes the reality for the black experience. Mm-hmm. It truly does. And then we start having, in school, every student understands money and how money works. There's always going to be poor. There's always going to be wealthy folks that are in the planet. I mean, I think the Bible talks about that all the time, that's there's going to be poor folks. How am I serving other people? And if I can find a way to serve other people, and that means other people that might not be in the community that I'm a part of, and so if we were to take everybody that is doing something that says it would be great that believes that black people should have, more money. And to me, there's this whole reparations thing that's not going to happen. And it's something that's just what does reparations really mean? It's how many opportunities can we make sure that are exposed to our young black families as they move forward through life? And it means that person who owns the 7-Eleven or owns the local mortgage company or owns the real estate company just saying, hey, I'm going to make sure that if I own a real estate company, then I'm going to make sure I'm going to try to find houses that folks that are of color can afford. If I own the 7-Eleven, I'm going to try, whether it's hiring people or it's saying, okay, out of whatever my philanthropy is, and maybe it's only, $1,000 or something. Well, that could send a kid to, an engineering camp or something like that. How do I send that kid in? Because if you go into schools, there are kids who want to do stuff.
Of course.
And they would love to be exposed to it, and they love to do it. And I see some of our more wealthy schools that have all these bus trips and field trips and camps and things that kids can go to. But yeah, the mom has to pay, $1,000 or $500 for their kid to go to camp. I have kids myself that, my grandkids get to go and they're exposed to a whole, chess camp, sailing camp, all these other things that they're able to go to. Harry Potter camp that I know other.
That's a thing?
That's a thing. There's a Harry Potter camp at some schools that just.
Don't tell my kids, please.
Okay. That they've been to. And, their summers are full of stuff that they can do. Well, how do we just get, hey, sponsor a kid to be able to be exposed to it, because then they're going to grow up. I think we're doing okay in our universities and our colleges and historically black colleges and the regular colleges, but we don't want them to leave college with so much debt that they can't. And, I think you spoke to that earlier. That
it drives me nuts.
There's no reason and that's another system. Why does our educational system, if we're going to spend all this money as a government. Well, I think education is one of those important things that gives people, a leg up. And so, if we do have state schools, how do we make sure that they're super affordable? And some of the private schools that are there, there's so many endowments. You think of a Harvard endowment or a Princeton endowment, and some of the, nobody pays for school to go to those schools, right? But then what does the entrance and getting into them look like? And I know they've been doing, things for several years to get people there, but there's so many great schools that are right next to those that, hey, we need to let more kids in to go to, if education is part of it. But it's just experiences. The more experiences that we can give our communities, that changes everything. And then teach people how to have great relationships.
I love it.
It's always going to come back to relationships.
What's the question I forgot to ask you about your book, about your mentorship, about the podcast you're running? I think you're the only person I met that's doing more than me, because you do mortgage and notary and real estate, all this stuff, all in service of one goal. But what's the stuff I forgot to ask you about what you're spending your time and your life's mission on?
I don't think that you forgot to ask me. It's just that whatever I can possibly do, for folks that would want to come alongside me, or folks that you might have some, this year I'm just interviewing African-American men because I want to get to the 100 and then go beyond. So if there are people in your sphere of influence that you think would be phenomenal for just me to talk to, because to me, it doesn't matter if they say, well, how many celebrities do you have? Or, how many views can you get on your podcast? Well, that's not reality, right? I mean, right. I can interview, and I want to interview some of those folks. And there's a gentleman named Myron Golden, who is a Black business strategist who is just amazing and phenomenal. And so I'm going to do a podcast with him, and, hopefully that'll help, the numbers. But at the same time, I want to, the guy that I just interviewed that came out of prison after 10 years, and you hear his life story, and then the guy who's a great dad, and then the guy who doesn't know how to be a dad. And, so I want to interview people that are successful in their life as far as family and relationships. That's the goal. It's not successful. Yes, do I want some money people? Absolutely. But I also want some people who have figured out this trust thing. I had a gentleman that I just interviewed not too long ago, that a multimillionaire, and he wears his overalls and jeans to work every day because when he had the nice Mercedes and he had everything else, people thought he was a drug dealer, and people thought that, he can't relate to us anymore.
Right.
So now he drives in a beat up truck and then goes and helps community and does stuff. So those are the heroes in the community that are doing stuff. That dad who says, I show up to every one of my kids' games. I pick them up from school, and it's hard because I don't have time. And, those are the folks that we want to see over and over and over again. And then I guess would be my next book's going to come out around Christmas, which is the decision formula, how to make the decisions. And so that's going to be, I'm even more excited. This is a good book, There Is No Tiger, but the decision formula is, as I started thinking about, I talked a little bit about having reversible decisions and then irreversible decisions. Then I talk about the journey. What is that journey? And then I talk about the cost. What does it cost for every decision that you make? And then just being able to have a formula to say, okay, this is going to be a big decision, this is going to be a little decision, but I need to have it written down. Just don't, make it willy-nilly as you're doing stuff. So that same format, lots of really cool stories and that kind of stuff that will be coming out. So I can't wait for the rest of my life. I mean, it's like I feel like I'm just getting started, being a professor and a teacher and all those things that equip me and help me become the person that I am now. So now I can go out and make a difference in people's lives.
I have to ask, and I hope you can stay a few minutes longer.
Absolutely.
You've mentioned it a couple of times. How much does your faith play into all this? Because you mentioned several times your relationship with God, praying on things. Like, how much of, we'll call it chapter 2 or 3 or 7 or whatever of your life is driven by your faith?
And thank you for asking that. The last chapter, not the last chapter, the middle chapter in my new book is the God factor. It is the center and the core of who I am, my faith in God and what he's able to do in my life. And my decisions are made through a lot of prayer. My decisions are made because I'm so grounded in knowing, okay, God, what do you have for me today? What can I do that's going to make a difference? When I think about the book of Genesis, and I think about, all these things that I've been talking about, having my belief system and saying, the reason that you're succeeding isn't because, the things, whether you could control them or not, they're internal. That comes from your faith and my belief that when I'm praying to God, because I was even telling my wife this, that there is an invisible world. You can't tell me that there's not an invisible world. I pick up this cell phone and somehow there's somebody on the other end of the planet who is able to talk to me. And I think that there's fighting going on. And I think that when we get to a place where we have to count on us and internally, I don't think that comes from just me being able to make it up. When I look at my hand and go, how does this actually work? Right now we're able to drive this car here. And there's this phrase that says, let go and let God, that, one of the phrases that we have. Well, I had an epiphany this week because Tesla gave me a month free of the full driving capacity. So I left Denver and I hit full drive and I let go of the steering wheel, and it pretty much drove me all the way here for less than about 10 minutes because it didn't back me up into the charging station. It just took me to the charging station and I had to back it up. But I'm thinking, okay, with my faith, if I can let go and trust a car that was developed by a man and a whole bunch of men, because I'm sure it wasn't just one, that allows me to navigate my life, then my God is probably navigating my life here, because anything worth doing is worth doing well. And if I'm not good at it, then that's probably not what God put in me to be good at and try to be. And so if I, with my prayers and the things that I say, and like I said, that prayer that I have every day, give me the wisdom to do the things that will please you and serve others, then I'm working in God's purpose. And when you're working in God's purpose and you believe that's what he's got for you, everything seems to work. And when I talk to my kids and all the things that happen in life, I can say, well, okay, based on scriptures and the things that, I know, I can't do this by myself. I would go crazy if I had to overthink without believing that there's a God that is in control and, lets things and allows things to happen and wants what's best for us. So that's kind of where I'm at with my faith. And like I said, it's part of my core of who I am, where I want to go. And I want, when I die, I want God to say, good job, my faithful servant. You did the things because you took care of my children, and everybody's doing.
I feel like that's a perfect place to end the podcast, okay. But I always close with asking two questions. I think I might know the answer to one of them. Just going into, this will come out in November of 2024-ish. What are you looking most forward to going into the new year, 2025? Like what's lighting you up that you're looking forward to in the next year? And then what's your favorite movie and why?
Gotcha. Looking forward to most is seeing where this takes off and seeing where it can go, and, just being obedient to God and say, okay, God, you told me to do this. Now show me why. And so I am so looking. I think 2025 is going to be the best year that I've ever had in my entire life, because obviously I think I have to get, I know obvious to you, but obvious to Brian is I'm going to have to get rid of some of the things that I'm doing in order to really do the things right that I'm moving into, and serving the people that I need to serve, and finding ways to make sure that throughout whatever I do, that I'm serving him. And then I'm also saying, okay, this is where I can help you. And I look at myself when I think of like a Tony Robbins, or, I used to work with Ed and Patrick Bet-David. I worked with him for many years as well. And I think about those guys have some really cool stuff that they're putting out to the world. But the majority of people who show up at their doorsteps aren't ready. And so if I can help people learn who they are and have and be able to start using their gifts so that when they show up at one of their doorsteps, they can take full advantage of everything. Like I think of, when I walked on coals with Tony Robbins, I wasn't ready to do all the things that I should have been able to. It was a great experience, and I came home and said, well, now what? I'm not that person that can take advantage of that. So that's it. My favorite, oh my gosh. I guess my favorite movie is a television series that's got 8 seasons, because I'm so complex. And it's 24, because I don't know if you've ever seen 24.
I've seen 24.
With Mr. Jack Bauer, because he's unapologetic and he knows what he wants, and he saves the world over and over and over again. So I just, there's some kind of doomsday that obviously doesn't happen in our world, but I guess it could. So that's my favorite series.
By the way, I have to admit, I had the biggest crush on Elisha Cushbrook, the girl that played his daughter. Yes. And when they killed her off, I was out. I was like, they killed her. I'm done. I'm not watching the show anymore. She was so hot. You can't kill the hot daughter on the show. I'm out. I stopped watching it.
Renee, what's my favorite movie? Man of Steel, because Superman's a big thing for our family. And there's some Denzel movies in there that have just been, phenomenal when I think about, whether it was the Malcolm X movie where I'm just watching this amazing actor do stuff, or it's Virtuosity when he's running around like as a guy. But I love movies. And
by the way, we've done almost 200 podcasts. The number one movie that is stated is Denzel Washington's Man on Fire. Men just love that, like, vicious
he's taking
revenge,
care of the kid, right?
Taking care of the kid, saving the kid, revenge, knows he's going to die, and, like, doesn't care. Is just effing up terrorists and cartel members left and right. Like, I think a dozen people have said that that's their favorite movie. Yeah. So it's moved up the list for me as I've rewatched it.
Gladiator would be another one.
Oh, so good.
Gladiator is it's the underdog story, but they're having a new one with Denzel in it that comes out next month.
It better be good. If they screw up Gladiator, I'm going to be so mad.
You can't screw up Gladiator. I mean, but just going, the king doesn't get to win,
yeah,
even though he dies. But it's just, you just get there and you just want to take on the world. Even the Rocky movies, Rocky IV. I do a montage thing where the song War, that is, when he's doing all the, in Rocky IV before he does the thing. So I'll do a thing in my coaching, I just did it with a group of mortgage folks this last week. We're looking at vision. So I play that music, and then I walk them through the vision of, okay, so you're signing documents and you're moving to, and it gets to the climax. And so I use that movie.
Are there any great track movies? I can't think of one off the top of my head.
There's my favorite track movie. There's like the Jesse Owens story, and there's that one goes through, and what's the other one?
Chariots of Fire.
Chariot of Fire is one of them, but it's the what's the guy that played in not Family Ties. It's Father Like Son.
Okay.
So there's a scene in like Father Like Son that you're going to have to go watch, right? Because I coach relays. It's like Father Like Son. So what's the actor in there? Cameron.
Kirk Cameron.
Kirk Cameron.
Yeah.
Cameron's in there, and then he switches positions. It's kind of like Freaky Friday, but he switches positions. So Kirk Cameron is now the dad, and they're doing this relay baton thing. And so they start the race, and so he's getting it's a mile relay. So he's getting the baton, and he runs out of the exchange because he's never, he's a doctor, and now he's in this
he's never done it. Yeah,
he's never done it. So they're calling him back. He runs back and gets the baton, and now he's running, and he gets gas, and he can't do it, and then he figures out, and they show him running, and he gets to like the finish line. And he knows, I guess he's seen people dive over the finish line before, right? And so this slow motion of him leaping off, and they've already lost the race. They're not. It's just he's trying to beat one person, and he jumps up and he's like fully spread eagle, and he lands on the track because he's diving to the finish line, and the finish line is still like 5 feet away.
All right, I got to watch that.
That is my favorite track scene of all time in any of the movies that I've been in. So.
Well, Dr. B, man, I appreciate you being here. Anytime you're coming through Vegas, let's sit down again and chat.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks,
I appreciate
man.
it. All right. Talk to you soon.